Hello and welcome. My name is Anjali, and today we're diving into a critical topic in public education: the impact of streaming on students, particularly those from marginalized groups. Drawing on the insightful research of Alison Guime St. Vincent, we'll explore why this subject matters for educators and how it can shape our teaching practices for the better. I first stumbled upon the article Marginal at Best in 2021 as one of my assigned additional readings during Teachers College, and I was immediately hooked. This reading had definitely had a significant impact on my teaching practices and worldviews, so being able to do an analysis on this reading is quite the privilege. Alison Guime St. Vincent is a dedicated educator, Toronto District School Board administrator, and researcher with a passion for exploring issues of equity and social justice in public education. With a background in educational policy and practice, she has spent several years working on diverse educational environments, advocating for marginalized student populations, and working on a better environment for all educators in general. In Marginal at Best, Alison Guime St. Vincent examines the practice of streaming or tracking within public education systems, where students are sorted into academic paths based on perceived ability levels, often determined through early testing and assessments. This practice, while intended to tailor educational approaches to individual student needs, has profound and often negative effects on students, especially those from marginalized communities, including racialized groups and students from low-income families. Guime St. Vincent brings to light the experience of students, educators, and administrators impacted by streaming. The article reveals that streaming tends to place students into rigid academic tracks, such as those directed towards university preparation, college preparation, or general/applied studies, can limit their educational opportunities and influence their future career options. Students placed in lower streams often receive a less challenging curriculum and, as a result, are less prepared for post-secondary education or high-skilled employment. The narrative approach allows the author to dwell deeply into personal impacts of these systems, drawing attention to the disparities that streaming perpetuates across socioeconomic and racial lines. Guime St. Vincent argues that streaming reinforces and perpetuates social inequalities by systemically directing students from marginalized communities into lower academic tracks. These placements are often less about students' abilities or potential, or more reflective biases in how their capabilities are assessed. Teachers and administrators influenced by systemic biases may unconsciously have lower expectations for these students, thereby affecting their educational trajectories. This system creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, where students in lower tracks receive fewer resources and less rigorous instructions, which limits their opportunities and reinforces a cycle of disadvantage. Through personal stories and interviews, Guime St. Vincent underscores the human impact of an educational system that, rather than leveling the playing field, often entrenches socioeconomic and racial divides. The author highlights the resilience of determination of many students and educators who resist the limitation and imposed by streaming, advocating for more equitable practices. However, the narrative is clear that individual efforts are insufficient without systemic reform. The study calls for a reevaluation of streaming systems in public education, proposing that schools adopt a more inclusive practices that offer equal opportunities for all students, regardless of background. The primary research question in Alison Guime St. Vincent's studies centers around the impact of streaming in public education on students, with a particular focus on marginalized groups. Streaming is the practice of placing students in different educational streams or academic paths, meaning applied, academic, mixed pathways, based on the perceived ability levels often determined by standardized tests, teachers' assessments, or past academic performance. This study questions the broader implications of such systems based on students' educational and social outcomes, and challenges the assumption that streaming benefits students equally. The author examines how streaming affects students' academic opportunities and outcomes, particularly those from marginalized groups such as racial minorities, low-income families, and non-native English speakers. For instance, students placed in lower academic tracks often receive a curriculum with limited academic rigor, which restricts their chances of meeting prerequisites for higher education or specialized programs. For example, a student placed in an applied or general stream in math may only cover basic concepts, leaving them unprepared for advanced courses required for university admissions. This results in a self-fulfilling cycle where students in lower streams are confined to limited educational pathways, making it difficult to pursue academic success comparable to those in advanced streams. Guim St. Vincent also addresses how streaming affects teacher expectations and resource allocations. Teachers in lower academic streams may unknowingly hold lower expectations for students, which can affect the quality and rigor of instructions students receive. The curriculum resources and support systems for these tracks are often less robust, meaning that students in lower streams are systemically given fewer opportunities to excel or challenge themselves academically. For example, gifted programs or specialized support often prioritize students in higher streams, further widening the educational gap between stream groups. Socially, streaming has significant impacts on students' self-perceptions, peer relations, and a sense of belonging. Students assigned to lower streams may develop a sense of inferiority, reduced self-worth, as they internalize the idea that they are less capable or not academic enough. For instance, students in lower tracks may feel stigmatized because they are aware that they are treated differently, which can damage their motivation and confidence. Such labeling may lead to students to disengage from school, contributing to a higher dropout rates and lower aspirations for post-secondary education or careers that demand high qualifications. The study gathers data through interviews, personal stories, and reflective accounts, capturing the nuanced ways in which streaming influences educational trajectories and social identities. Each narrative is analyzed to uncover recurring themes such as the reinforcements of social inequalities, diminished self-esteem among students in lower streams, and the pressure on educators to differentiate instructions based on the stream. This narrative-based data illuminates how streaming impacts students beyond academics, affecting their sense of belonging, self-worth, and aspirations. In Marginal at Best, the author employs a qualitative research method with the focus on narrative inquiry to explore the impacts of streaming. Narrative inquiry, as a research method, centers on collecting and analyzing individual stories to understand complex social phenomena. This approach allows the author to dwell deeply into the personal experiences of students, teachers, and other stakeholders impacted by streaming. By highlighting these personal narratives, the story reveals the emotional and social dimensions of streaming, which might be overlooked in quantitative studies focused solely on statistical outcomes. Narrative inquiry in the study has the strength of capturing the subjective, lived experiences of those involved. It provides a platform for voices, allowing students, teachers, and parents to share how streaming has shaped their lives in unique ways. This approach also uncovers the emotional and psychological consequences of streaming, which are difficult to quantify, but highly relevant to understanding its full impact. Additionally, narrative inquiry allows for a deeper exploration of contextual factors that might affect the streaming experience, such as socioeconomic background, school environment, and community expectations. These contextual details provide a richer understanding of how streaming perpetuates systemic inequities, as well as how individuals interpret and respond to their educational placements. However, narrative inquiry also has limitations. Since it relies on subjective accounts, it may be challenging to generalize the findings to all schools or educational systems. The personal stories, while impactful, reflect the experiences of specific individuals, which may vary widely based on context. Additionally, the researchers' interpretations of these narratives may be influenced by their own biases or preconceptions about streaming, which can affect the objectivity of the analysis. To address this, researchers often use techniques like reflexivity, where they reflect on their own biases, but achieving complete neutrality can still be challenging. Finally, narrative inquiry can be time-sensitive, requiring detailed, in-depth interviews and thorough analysis to authentically capture each participant's perspective. In the study, ethical concerns are carefully addressed to ensure that the rights, dignity, and privacy of participants are respected. Given that this research relies on narrative inquiry, which involves sharing personal stories and experiences, the researcher must take steps to protect participants' identities and maintain the integrity of their voices. As stated on page 127, to safeguard participants, St. Vincent uses pseudonyms and altered descriptions to prevent readers from identifying individuals. This approach not only protects participants, but also encourages them to share their stories more openly. In educational research, particularly those with marginalized population, there is often an inherent power dynamic between the researcher and participants. The author is mindful of these dynamics, working to build trust and create a collaborative research environment where participants feel empowered to share their stories without fear of judgment or exploitation. This may involve using conversational rather than structured interviews, allowing participants to guide the direction to their narratives and feel an ownership over how these stories are shared. Discussing the negative impacts of streaming may bring up painful memories or experiences for participants, so the researcher must handle these conversations with empathy and care. To minimize harm, the researcher provides a supportive environment during the interviews, ensuring that the participants felt safe to express their difficult emotions and recounting challenging experiences. At the same time, the benefits of the study, raising awareness about the impacts of streaming and advocating for equitable educational practices, are significant as participant stories may contribute to positive systemic change. Though narrative inquiry in the study was very impactful, another alternative method could be the mixed methods approach that combines qualitative and quantitative data. By integrating both types of data, researchers can gain a more holistic understanding of streaming's effects on students, especially marginalized groups. The proposed mixed method approach will include a quantitative component. Through conducting large-scale surveys to gather data on student outcomes across various streamed and non-streamed programs, surveys could cover academic performances metrics such as grades and standardized tests, and social factors which will include self-esteem, motivation, and engagement. This quantitative data can provide a broader, more generalized understanding of how streaming affects student groups differently. 2. A qualitative component. Using semi-structured interviews or focus groups to collect detailed narratives from a smaller sample size of teachers and possibly parents, including their students, these interviews would delve into personal experiences, providing the context for the quantitative results. For instance, qualitative insights could explore how students feel about being placed in different streams, the impacts of streamings on their self-perceptions, and how it affects their relationships with the peers and their teachers. And finally, 3. Data integration. The mixed methods approach would integrate findings from both components, allowing for a comprehensive analysis. For instance, if the quantitative data shows lower self-esteem of academic performances for marginalized groups in lower streams, the qualitative narratives could help explain these trends by offering insights to the lived experiences. This integration could reveal patterns and causal relationships between streaming and specific educational or social outcomes. The study effectively addresses its research question by illustrating the ways in which streaming influences students' educational journeys, social identities, and mental well-being. By focusing on individual narratives, the author showcases the lived experiences of students, teachers, and families, highlighting how streaming shapes students' academic outcomes and emotional health in ways that go far beyond classroom performance. This research is important because it challenges a deeply ingrained practice in public education that has far-reaching implications for equity and social justice. Streaming, by grouping students based on perceived ability levels, often limits opportunities for those placed in lower streams, particularly students from marginalized communities who already face systemic barriers. By focusing on the personal narratives of students, teachers, and families, the study provides a humanized and compelling perspective on how streaming reinforces existing social and educational inequalities. This encourages educators to adopt a more adaptive approach to support every student's growth, moving away from practices that implicitly limit certain students based on initial assessments or demographic factors. Why I particularly gravitate toward this article and why I think it is a strong article in general is because it also includes the idea of intersectionality coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. To understand what intersectionality is, here's a quick video that describes the purpose and the relevance.
Intersectionality is just a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves, and they create obstacles that often are not understood within conventional ways of thinking about anti-racism or feminism or whatever social justice advocacy structures we have. Intersectionality isn't so much a grand theory, it's a prism for understanding certain kinds of problems. African American girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. That's probably a race and a gender problem. It's not just a race problem, it's not just a gender problem. So I encourage people to think about how the convergence of race stereotypes or gender stereotypes might actually play out in the classroom, between teachers and students, between students and other students, between students and administrators, and commit themselves to understanding that as a way of intervening and providing equal educational opportunity for all students, regardless of their identities. Identity isn't simply a self-contained unit. It is a relationship between people in history, people in communities, people in institutions. So schools do a good job when they understand that and when they commit themselves to curricular development, to opportunities in the school for all students to understand the histories that have brought us to this particular moment. You can't change outcomes without understanding how they've come about. So independent schools can take the lead on that to be responsive to their student populations and to the communities out of which the students come.
The impact of the study lies in its capacity to foster awareness, promote dialogue, and encourage actionable change in the world of public education. By focusing on marginalized students' experiences with streaming, the research underscores the necessity of equity in education and serves as a vital resource for educators striving to create inclusive and supportive learning environments. As discussions around equity, inclusion, and social justice in education continue to gain prominence, this study contributes significantly to the conversation. It aligns with contemporary educational movements that seek to address systemic barriers and promote an equitable learning environment for all students. Thank you all for listening to my presentation on Marginal at Best.